Welcome to Requity Insights, a channel dedicated to documenting our journey to 100 world-class communities.
Welcome back to Requity Insights. I'm your host, Velez, and I'm joined by my co-host and the CEO of the Requity Group, Marma. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the latest trend in outdoor hospitality, glamping. With changes in camper demographics, shifts in consumer behavior and priorities in a post-pandemic world, and the rise of social media, an increasing number of people are looking for unique and picturesque places to travel and stay in. And glamping has quickly become a popular option for those who want to enjoy the great outdoors without sacrificing comfort. In this episode, we'll be exploring how camper demographics are changing and the role glamping has played in this shift, how RV campground owners have responded to these changing market demands, and lastly, we'll discuss some of the latest trends and innovations in the glamping industry. Dylan, can you tell us a little bit about the concept of glamping, what it is, and how it differs from traditional RV camping?
Sure thing, Lewis. So glamping is all of the craze these days. There is a huge uptick in demand. I think the OTA platforms, the Airbnbs of the world, the Booking.coms, VRBOs of the world have reported over the last 10 years a 310% increase in the number of bookings that are coming in from glamping. I believe the number, according to the North America Glamping Report, 17 million households went glamping in 2021, which is up 155% since 2019. Wow. So I know if you think back to, of course, a lot of people look at this and say, well, that has to be influenced by COVID. It absolutely was, and it absolutely did accelerate the amount of bookings through COVID, but that number has been steadily going up for the last 10 years, and we think that this trend is overall here to stay. Not to say it's going to grow at the same rate, but it is becoming more and more popular, and I think as the social proof gets out there and people hear about their friends doing it, then they're going to go out and try it for the first time, and you have a lot of new campers experiencing camping for the first time, or they're re-experiencing camping through glamping, right? Yep. Which is really, really neat. Now, what is it? Glamping is a fusion of camping and luxury travel, hence glamorous camping, right? It's providing high-end amenities and accommodations in an outdoor setting. So picture yurts, which are the large tent structures, treehouses, safari tents, cabins, tiny homes, wagons. These would all fall under the category of unique accommodations or glamping structures. They're adding to the overall sense of adventure, novelty. Generally, these structures are going to have water, sewer, Wi-Fi. A lot of them even have heating and cooling available within the structure itself. They generally have electric as well. So you have this experience where you're going to still get the same connection with the outdoors as you would through traditional tent camping, but you're doing it now in a way where you have this cool accommodation, way more Instagrammable. You can take pictures of it, you can post about it on your story, yep. and then you don't have all of the hassle of traditional tent camping where you're sitting there spending hours setting up the tent, taking down the tent. You're waking up in the morning with your back hurting because you're laying on unlevel ground and things along those lines, right? So I think in today's world, as we've talked about on the show, previous shows, people like things more done for them. People are not as into roughing it as much as they used to be. And this is just the evolution of where society's going, is you're seeing glamping. People are willing to pay more now, pay a premium to be able to have the glamping experience over your traditional tent camping experience. So that's a little bit about the concept of glamping and kind of how it differs from traditional camping.
Dylan, how have camper demographics changed in recent years, and what role do you think glamping has played in that shift?
So it's been interesting to watch the changes that have taken place in the camping world, and I think a lot of people thought millennials were just going to maybe not be as into camping as a whole, and they've definitely, I think, surprised many of us by, you're seeing millennials have a large increase in camping versus previous generations, and they're really leading the charge as the number one camping demographic. And you're also seeing good signs that Gen Z is following suit in the same direction. I think it's probably because we are in such a interconnected universe that we live in, where we're sitting behind a computer screen, nonstop these days. So that I think people are now finding a desire to get outside and find a way to disconnect, and glamping and camping is a great way of being able to do that. So when you look at the new camper, if you look at most millennials, they're saying most dedicated millennial campers actually own RVs. As many as 78% of people that would consider themselves a camper are RV owners in the millennial demographic, which is a pretty impressive number. And they also have high household incomes, with household incomes of over $100,000 being the largest segment of campers in today's world. And despite everything going on with inflation and the uncertainty of the economy, surveys still suggest that people still see camping as an affordable means of travel and still plan to take their 2 weeks plus vacation time, and camping being a great way to go about doing that. So we still see steady future for the campground industry.
Yep.
And glamping has played a big role in this shift. And I think glamping is a possible gateway for millennials or general, people that are interested in getting into camping that may not be quite ready to pull the trigger on taking out a loan on an RV. This may be a way for them to get out to experience camping, and maybe they'll be permanent glampers and just do this a few times a year and make it something that they do with their families or friends, and maybe they fall in love with it and they want to continue to camp more frequently and camp at all different times of the year, and they invest into an RV, right? So I think there's a lot of different directions they can go, but either way, it's great for the industry, as it's definitely just giving broader exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like it really is being encompassed under that outdoor hospitality umbrella.
Yep.
So yeah, it's great to see that it's like the same crowd, the same target audience between the glamping and the RV resort people.
Yep, very much.
That being said, how have RV campground owners responded to the rise of glamping?
So RV campground owners have responded to the rise of glamping by starting to pay attention to the demand that is out there and create many have started to create glamping accommodations within their campgrounds. I think this really starts with the park models, which are effectively RVs that look more like tiny homes and create more of that cabin experience. So these could fall under kind of your traditional cabin or tiny home experience. And we find that reports say those are still the number one most desired alternative accommodation is your traditional cabins. And traditional cabins are nice too because they usually have decent insulation. So they usually have longer amount of time, and they're not quite as dependent on good weather and season, the seasonality impacts that can take shape as to other units like teepees or something along those lines. That there's definitely not the level of insulation you want. Definitely has a much shorter season and is a lot more dependent on good weather. So I think that the cabins are really leading the charge still. Park models are leading the charge as the number one alternative accommodation, but you're seeing more and more uptick with people ordering covered wagons, the teepees and glamping domes, right? Things along those lines to be able to create these additional options for people to be able to choose from. And they've gotten some really significant ADRs or average daily rates as a result of that. So I think the overall sentiment that I see from the RV campground ownership community is there seems to be a level of respect for the traditional tent camper and wanting to continue to have that as an option for them. Yep. But there seems to be a trend away from that to more glamping units as replacing a lot of the traditional tent campers, just because that seems to be where the market is moving for the most part.
Yeah, it's great to see that the ownership side of things is trying to still respect that part of the industry and keep camping or traditional camping units through this new glamping experience. I think it's great, and I think that it also, with the tech that we're seeing, like with things like the OTA platforms, Airbnb, VRBO, they've now have a means to kind of promote these things.
Yep.
Besides the traditional way of people just kind of stumbling in, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And we use a lot of the OTAs for our alternative accommodation units, and those have been a huge hit. And in addition to that, I'd say that there's something special about having the brand that you have as an RV campground that gets a lot of people just naturally sharing through word of mouth and getting a lot of direct bookings as well.
Yeah, it's great. In a previous show, we discussed the lack of supply in that more high-end RV resort product. Does this shift towards glamping result in the development of these resorts entering the conversation more often?
So it definitely inspires the way people think about building their RV resorts, right? There are already quite a few groups out there that believe in the thesis that the higher end market is underserved currently, right? And there's a need for more of these newer resort style campgrounds to come out. And I think every single one of them that has been around the business for long enough right now is doing some kind of alternative accommodations. You're definitely seeing a huge demand for, again, starting with park models. Those are definitely leading the way. You're seeing people budget for up to 20% or more even of their initial sites to be park model sites. And then I think you're blending in a mixture of the other unique stays around that. And yeah, you're seeing a lot of people looking at that as, again, it's sort of in lieu of the tent sites usually on the newer builds. It's instead of having tent site area, it's glamping units and alternative accommodations that are going to get built to be able to serve the non-RVer camper.
Are there any emerging brands or companies around this space right now?
There are definitely there are quite a few names out there that are growing platforms that are specifically targeting audiences that are looking for these different glamping stays and building great social media brands around them to attract the demographics that we're talking about. A few that come to mind, one is Under Canvas, one is Auto Camp, then there's Collective Retreats, and then there is, I believe it's called Getaway House. Those that they're all doing a mixture with Auto Camp doing Airstreams, Under Canvas doing canvas tents, and then the other two doing more tiny homes and I believe also tent experiences that really have been really doing a good job at leading the way for us and creating great brands in the glamping industry.
I guess a really important question is, now that we know that there's definitely a demand for this space, what is the typical ROI on a glamping unit?
So the typical ROI on a glamping unit varies, of course, by unit type, but Sage Outdoor Advisory, who does a lot in the outdoor hospitality space, they put together a study to measure the ADRs of various different site types as it pertains to different types of glamping units. And I'll hit on some of the numbers and just realize that this is going to vary dramatically by the location that you're in, time of year, and so on. But the ADRs that we've seen, glamping domes are at $398. Covered wagons at $389. Treehouses at $327. Cabins, $284. Teepees, $270. Airstreams, $255. Tiny home / cabin, $253, yurts at $226, and then vintage trailers or RVs at $172. Wow. Admittedly, I don't think we can get numbers quite that good in most of the areas that we're located because it is very, very much location dependent. These numbers to me reflect probably something you're more likely to see on the West Coast in particular markets that come to mind. But I think if you look at the ADR you really have to pay attention to your market. And if you use a tool like an AirDNA or something along those lines, you can usually get a good sense of what short-term rentals are renting for and kind of use that as to gauge the strength of your market and the ADR that's possible against the rest of the market. So definitely don't use those numbers in your underwriting unless you have already vetted your market to feel comfortable that it supports it. That said, even with a fraction of those numbers, these can be extremely profitable investments, right? And I also want to remind you that a big piece of it is the seasonality. So while domes may do the highest ADR, they may have a much shorter season that they're open for each year because they don't have the insulation, and the cabins may be a little bit lower ADR, but they may be open in your market for 12 months out of the year. So you may have a better overall revenue, even though your average daily rate is a little bit lower. You have a longer season. So all things to think about and weigh into the equation as to what's going to be most profitable for you.
Yeah. What are some of the trends and innovations in the glamping industry that you find the most interesting or the most exciting?
Well, there's a lot going on. Right now, you see an increased demand for more full, immersive experiences, right? I think that's what you're selling more than anything. So sometimes that just comes down to the type of structure you're staying in. Sometimes it comes down to the location you're staying in. And then sometimes it comes down to the level of service that you're receiving. We've seen full-on wellness retreats take place at some of these glamping getaways where you have maybe one cabin per acre or something along those lines, spread across 30 acres, and then you might have full service food and beverage. You may have yoga or meditation practices on site, which is really interesting. And I think that starts to get more into full service hospitality business, but do see pretty strong demand for those full immersive experiences. The other trends, of course, tons of trends going on in technology right now, both from what that means for our operations and being able to better market the properties to also thinking about the customer experience and having some element of maybe smart home features, mobile check-in available, virtual tours that impact everything from the time the customer first comes across the brand to their actual experience there on site. And of course, there's always a delicate balance because we're trying to create a way to get outside and break free from technology, but we think there's still some value to having these things be technology enhanced. Yeah. Then you have social media. I mean, we already hit on that, but it's definitely leading the charge from a marketing standpoint. This is all about creating brands that people buy into, and then they feel proud of saying that, and they want to go share those brands. I believe the stat is that 61% of glampers are finding out about their accommodations through social media, whereas traditional hospitality is usually closer to around 39%. So clearly, this industry appeals especially to those that are surfing social media looking for a fun place to stay or a great experience to invest into. Then you have, I think on the campground side, you're seeing a lot more talk and then a decent amount of execution to follow, but there's still a long ways to go when it comes to these campgrounds that are already serving both RV campers and non-RV campers. And I think there's a lot of people sitting there saying, hey, we really need to start investing into these glamping units. And I think in the next few years, you're going to see a lot of that take place, which I think the market should absorb decently well, but it's not going to be just like we've seen with Airbnb. It's not just anyone that opens up a short-term rental is going to be succeeding. I think it's going to get a little bit more competitive as more options become available, but it'll take time to get there. So I think there's a good runway for the time being. And aside from that, I think we already hit on a lot of the key things, but just these experiential stays, I think, are something to definitely keep an eye on, and I think we're going to see a lot more of.
Yeah. I know that this is a topic that most people are tired of hearing about, but as you mentioned earlier, this space really got a boost during the pandemic. So how would you say, could you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, what was the impact of the pandemic on the glamping industry?
I think just like we say on the RV industry, it probably parallels it in many ways. We think the industry itself has already shown stable growth over long spans of time. In this case, it's not quite as long of a span as the RV industry, but we think that it probably fast forwarded us maybe 3 years in terms of being able to see the levels of occupancy and demand. And I do expect that it will taper off a bit, but I do think a lot of the influx in demand that's been here is here to stay. And I think the projections have it that there's still a really solid compounded annual growth rate for us in the future. I think I've heard anywhere between 6 to 8% over the next decade or so. So definitely still good signs pointing in the right direction that this industry, though it's got quite a big boost in the last few years, and maybe it will taper off a bit in the next few years, over the long span it should continue to grow.
What are some of the benefits and challenges of operating these glamping-focused RV campgrounds versus traditional RV campgrounds?
Well, a glamping unit is still like a hotel unit, right? It's a fully furnished unit that people are staying at, and some of them are even more fragile than traditional hotel stays or cabin stays may be, depending on what the accommodation type is. So we found that, for instance, renting out old RVs, especially when we were permitting pets to go into the RVs, would just get the entire place just covered in dog hair really quickly, and it would be a really messy cleaning that would take more than even a traditional hotel room would. So we've since kind of pivoted away from that, and I think depending on the type of structure, you have to be thoughtful as to the level of cleaning and make sure your cleaning fees are substantial enough to be able to cover the full cost of your cleaner's time, to be able to get in there and do a thorough job. But yeah, I think as you start to get into more of these alternative accommodations, you have to focus on the guest experience, making sure that you have everything stocked when it comes to towels, linens, beds made, soap, right, detergent, things along those lines. Yeah. So you have to really kind of be keeping up with a more solid inventory, cleaning process and whatnot. So it just becomes a little bit more labor intensive and time intensive to be able to manage that. I think there's also more that can go wrong generally than just cleaning off someone's RV site. So just you have to be ready for that. You have to be ready for a little bit more frequent issues to come up with guests that will reach out with questions or things that are missing, or help finding things around the accommodation unit. So it is a lot more like running a little portfolio of short-term rentals versus traditional RV sites. So just something to be aware of. But that said, I think the upside is worth it, and I think you're definitely, to maximize the value and best serve your audience, I think that having glamping accommodations is worth it every time, and there's a huge demand there. And like we said, we think these have potential to be kind of like that gateway entry point for a lot of these non-RV campers to kind of come out and experience that. And I think it's a special thing if you can be the property to do that for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Dylan, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in starting their own glamping-focused RV resort?
Yeah, so I think first determining if you need to, it depends on the size of your resort. If you're just wanting to start a glamping unit or a handful of units, you can do a glamping focused campground, or you can do something that's a hybrid of glamping and RV. I think first just getting clear on your overall goals and your strategy. If I was going to start small, I'd probably go one or the other versus having both. But then as you get to a certain scale, I think you should start to lean into starting to diversify your site types to be able to offer different types of experiences. So I would say just do some research, get really familiar with your area, especially when it comes to the visibility and the data that these different OTA platforms have given us access to. You can really pinpoint pretty accurately what kind of rates you can charge, what the occupancy levels are likely to be, and then that can allow you to kind of reverse engineer back into how much can you spend and invest up front to be able to make sure it's still a profitable venture and makes sense for you. So yeah, I think there's a lot I could go into, but that's my starter advice.
So I think that it's clear that glamping has really become much more than just a passing trend in the world of outdoor hospitality. With its unique blend of luxury and nature, glamping has attracted a new generation of travelers who are looking for something beyond the typical hotel or resort experience. And with the continued growth and innovation in the glamping industry, the possibilities for new and exciting outdoor accommodations, I think, are endless. We hope you found this information to be helpful. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to sign up for our email newsletter, linked in the show notes below. As always, please, if you enjoyed the content, like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Requity Insights, hosted by our team at the Requity Group. You can find recordings of all shows along with our opt-in form to set up a call and view future investment offerings on our company website, therequitygroup.com, also listed in the show notes.